welcome to today's podcast. I'm Granny Rhea.
And I'm Auntie Donia.
And we're here to talk about super special kids and cake.
Yes, cake!
We're coming to you from the studios of Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. This podcast is brought to you by our book, Let's Talk, Social Communicative Services and Supports for Your Young Child with ASD, published by Paul H. Brooks and available from Amazon. Our super special topic for today is food and super special kids. And there are lots of things to say about food because super special kids react to food in several different ways.
So one of the issues that I sometimes see with our super special kids is they can be picky eaters. And what that means is that they have a restricted diet and they will only eat a certain food type. So they may only eat chicken nuggets from McDonald's, or they'll only eat a certain brand of bread. And one of the ways or strategies that we can help the children is to introduce new foods through play. So you want to do this in a space that isn't formal, where they don't usually sit and eat their meals, so not in the kitchen or at the dining table, and allow them to play with the food items. So you can take, for example, a potato and slice it up, and they can use that for stamping with the paint. They can pretend to feed Teddy a carrot, a real carrot rather than a plastic one. And then later on, you can encourage them, after they've touched it, they can even kiss the food and then lick the food item. And finally, we would expect them to swallow it and chew it. But that's actually the last step in this stage.
Yeah, so giving kids a chance to play with the food makes it more theirs, so maybe they are less frightened by it. And it also gives them alternative ways to interact with the food initially until they realize through that interaction that eating is a pleasurable sensation. Are there some other strategies that you've used, Auntie Donia?
The other thing I like to do is to experiment with different temperatures and consistencies. So let's say, for example, your child likes to eat blackberries or blueberries. You can freeze a similar fruit like raspberries or grapes and see if they like them frozen. I know that frozen grapes in the summer can be quite delicious. The other thing I would suggest is that you keep a log of the foods that they like, and you can do what I call cross-contamination. That sort of sounds unpleasant, but it really is quite a pleasant experience, where you would take a fist amount of a food item that they really like. So let's say they like potato or sweet potato, and then you would take a very small amount of a new food item that they've been willing to lick or to try. And you blend that together and you see if they're going to be willing to eat it. And gradually you can increase the amount of the non-preferred food item.
That sounds like a cool idea. Some of it might really taste interesting. Well, of course, some super special kids are picky eaters, and it's very hard to get them to try new foods. But some super special kids have the opposite problem. They can like food too much, and there are even some syndromes of disability that involve having disorders in the control of appetite. So this can be a problem too. We don't want children to become obese, and we don't want to have that impair their health. And we also want to make sure that they eat healthy foods, not just the ones that are most delicious, like the really sweet and the really salty ones that we're all drawn to. So working with the child who has an overeating problem can be very challenging because food can be a very important reward for them, and we don't want to take that reward away. So one of the things we might try is a strategy we've talked about before in some other areas, something we call priming. So, for example, showing the child that they can have 3 marshmallows and showing them a picture of 3 marshmallows and saying they can have 1, 2, 3. And when the 3 are done, that's all the marshmallows we have for today. So we can do some kinds of activities like that. We can also reserve some foods rather than giving them during mealtime. We can reserve them as rewards and treats so that we make sure that the child doesn't overeat them but still has access to them, particularly at times when they might be helpful. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Auntie Donia?
I find that meal times as a family is a really great opportunity to share food, of course, but also to have some social time. So one of the other strategies is to actually use a smaller plate so that the quantity of the food, the child's having the same food that everybody else is eating, but the quantity may be a little bit less as well, especially for those children who don't know. They don't satiate. They don't know when they've had enough. And that way, if they want more and they've finished what's on their plate, then that way they can have more. And the parent or the family member can help guide them with that.
Yeah, so food can be a problem in a variety of ways, and we just have to be creative about thinking of strategies. But I think the important thing for parents to remember is that although it is our job to nurture the child and make sure that they get adequate nutrition that allows them to grow, we also want them to develop good eating habits. Of course, modeling is the most important strategy we have by always including a vegetable at every meal, monitoring our own amounts of food and thinking aloud about what to eat and how much to eat. So, for example, when mom's getting dinner ready and maybe she's making pork chops for dinner, she might say out loud, well, let me see, how many pork chops shall I make? There's 4 people in our family, so I could make 4 pork chops, but then nobody could have seconds. Maybe I'll make 5 or 6, and then we can share the extras and get some seconds that way. But we don't really need to eat 2 pork chops. So I think I'll just make 5 or 6. And in that way, show the child how you're thinking through the problem of what's appropriate to eat.
So, Granny Rhea, let's see what one of our listeners has sent us for today's super special question. Our super special question for today is, my child is 18 months. When I call my child's name, he doesn't respond. Should I be worried?
Well, that's a hard question because in many ways, 18-month-olds don't respond to everything. And we certainly don't want to worry every time we ask them a question and they don't answer it. But if a child is consistently not responding when we call their name, there are some things we can think about. The first thing we want to think about is, can they hear me? And a really reasonable first step in any situation where you're not sure whether the child understands you is to see about getting a hearing test. You can get a referral from your pediatrician for a hearing test, and that can help you to solve this problem. Now, one thing that we as speech-language pathologists feel strongly about is that the kind of hearing test that the pediatrician will do in his office, sometimes with a tuning fork or some other noisemaker, is really not very accurate. So if you have any concerns at all about your child's hearing, you really should go and see an audiologist who can do a scientific test of your child's hearing and decide whether there really is a significant loss.
We also have to remember, Granny Rhea, that at 18 months, children's attention is often single-channeled, which means if they're focused on an activity, it's difficult for them to leave that activity and turn to the person who's talking to them. So if you are noticing that your child isn't responding when you're calling their name, try coming down to their level and interrupting them, so touching them or making sure they can see your face and saying to them, Mummy or Daddy wants to ask you something, and then using their name. The other thing to keep in mind is that often children hear their name when they're being asked to do something. So I know as a little girl, when my mother would say, Donia, I knew that she was asking me to do something I wouldn't particularly want to do, because in my home, I'm actually called Don or Auntie Don or Auntie Donia. And so if that is the case, you want to make sure that you're actually giving an instruction, sometimes without using their name first. So you can say something like, go get your backpack, pick up your shoes. And when they do that, you can then use their name when you're praising them for what they've done. So, well done, Oscar, for getting your shoes. So they begin to associate their name with something positive as opposed to being always told what to do.
That's a great idea, Auntie Donia. And to carry that idea a little bit further, another thing you can try if you are having trouble getting your child to answer when you call his name is to call him over to you just to get a hug or a tickle so that he gets an immediate reward for responding to his name. And if you do that a few times every day for a few days, if he is able to respond, he will. So it certainly makes sense to test out several of these hypotheses that we've been talking about. Can the child hear? And if he can't, that might be interfering with his ability to respond. Is he not answering because he doesn't want to, because he's afraid you might ask him to do something he doesn't want to do? And so in that case, we try to eliminate the negative consequence and increase the positive consequence of responding to his name by not using his name when we want him to do something some of the time, and by using his name when we want him just to come over and get a hug or a tickle. So these are some strategies you can try in order to answer the question for yourself about whether this represents a difficulty. Now, it can sometimes be a red flag for certain kinds of developmental disabilities. And if after experimenting in these ways, you still find that your child is not responding to his name, that's the point at which you might want to talk to your pediatrician or your early intervention agency in your local school and see if there are some assessments that it makes sense to do.
Auntie Donia, there are so many myths and misconceptions in working with children with developmental disabilities. And some of them are so absurd, they just make us go, arghhh!
So Granny Rhea, what's the thing for this segment that makes us go, arghhh?
Well, I'll tell you something that really annoys me, Auntie Donia.
What's that?
Very often when super special kids get an individualized education plan and there's a pressure to provide inclusion for the child so that he or she participates with typical peers, very often that inclusion is limited to things in the curriculum like gym and music. And the child doesn't really participate in the classroom activities that are the bulk and the heart, really, of an educational setting. And that just kind of makes me sad that these children only get to participate in activities that are not part of the major curriculum. Not part of the curriculum. Yeah. So I think that even if a child has an intellectual disability and can't perhaps read or do math at grade level, there are still things that they can enjoy doing in the regular classroom. For example, science is a great opportunity for super special kids to observe how their peers interact with the scientific materials, to see how things change, how plants grow, how chemicals change. I think there are lots of ways that they can interact at whatever their level is, and the peers can provide some nice teaching for them by telling them what's going on. As long as it's safe, I think those classroom opportunities can be very useful. Same thing with sort of social studies or geography, for them to have a chance to look at the maps and to talk about the costumes and the foods that are eaten in various cultures. Even if their participation is limited, it still exposes them to the kinds of ideas that their peers are learning about. And so I always like to try to include some aspect of the curriculum within the inclusion plan rather than limiting it to these special activities.
And I sometimes recommend, we do this actually in the ASD Nest program, that we that the super special kids invite their friends to lunch. So rather than being in the large, noisy lunchroom, that the super special kids and some of the typical kids have lunch together and sometimes play a game as well. And usually a teacher or sometimes a speech and language pathologist will set that up and facilitate it. But this can be a really great opportunity for the children to learn from each other. They model different, positive behaviors for each other as well. And we know that around food, we can get a lot of lovely conversation and natural social interactions.
And I love the idea of the super special kids issuing the invitations. I think that's really nice because it makes it seem, first of all, that they are reaching out to the typical kids, which many of them very much want to do. And also it makes it something special for the typical kids. It's a privilege to be invited to this special luncheon rather than sitting in the noisy cafeteria with everybody else. So I love that idea.
And Granny Rhea, we do this from elementary through to middle school. And you'll be surprised, pleasantly surprised actually, that in middle school, it gets so busy in the special lunch bunch where the super special kids and the typical kids are, that the typical kids all want to come because they want to be part of, the games and the special foods and treats that are sometimes there too. But really it's the enjoyment that you see between them, because the thing is, our super special kids have these hidden talents and interests that some of the typical kids don't see in the classroom.
That's a great point, Auntie Donia. As important as it is for our super special kids to have some opportunities to participate in the classroom, it's just as important for them to be able to show who they are as individuals. And setting up these social opportunities is really key to that. We'll talk at another podcast about the whole idea of peer-mediated interactions. That's a great super special topic for us.
Granny Rhea, there is nothing wrong with eating cake for breakfast.
You are so right, Auntie Donia, and we're going to be talking about some things that are as much fun as eating cake for breakfast.
Auntie Donia, what's our cake for breakfast this time?
It's cooking with your kids. So with the holiday season coming soon, it's a really lovely opportunity to spend some time in the kitchen cooking with your kids. And this can be really easy activities where you could be making applesauce, you could be doing Rice Krispies and marshmallows. There are so many things that you can do that actually don't even involve necessarily the oven, but where the cooking experience, so the children learning the sequence of what happens, following the instructions, and mostly, since this is cake for breakfast, having fun with you. Did you do a lot of cooking with your children, Granny Rhea?
Well, I'm not much of a cook, I have to admit. But one thing I did love to do with my kids, and it is also great to do with super special kids, is to make peanut butter balls. Peanut butter balls are an extremely simple recipe, not the most healthy one, but really easy to make and lots of fun. So you just take some peanut butter and about an equal amount of butter. I said it wasn't healthy. And then you add about a half measure of confectioner's sugar. And you can mix it together with your hands. It's very goopy and messy. And once it's all mixed together, then you just shape it into little balls. And you can place them on a plate or a cookie sheet. And if you like, you can take a chocolate kiss and kind of sit it in the middle of the ball. It is so delicious and such fun to make. And as Auntie Donia was saying, when you're cooking with your super special kids, it's a great idea to kind of make what might look like a visual schedule for the recipe, where you can just have a picture of each step and you can guide the children through the steps and then cross them off or tear them off if you like after they're completed. And that gives the children a very nice way of seeing how far along in the process they are, and I think adds to the fun of the activity.
And I also like to take photographs too. It's a good idea to take pictures of, the fun and the mess that you've had together. And that's really lovely to look back on, because when they look back on these shared memories, it really helps them to recall the positive experiences and to later talk about it as well.
That's a great idea, Auntie Donia. And you can even take your pictures and make them into a little book on your iPad or even on paper if you like to print them out. And that's a great context for your child to talk through. They can take it and talk to friends about it, show it to grandma, show it to Auntie Donia, take it to their friends outside to play about, and they can pretend to do it again. So turning the sort of extending the activity so that they can revisit it is another great way to take the super special fun that you have about cooking and really translate it into something that's useful for your kids' development.
And I think, as you said, Granny Rhea, that even if you feel as a parent or as a caregiver that you're not a very good cook yourself, because you know the children are going to have fun, it's really about the process. And I'm sure you'll still enjoy the delicious treats, especially those peanut butter ones.
Yeah, those are great. You really can't ruin them. But the other thing I wanted to say about cooking with kids is that one thing you have to give up when you cook with kids is cooking neatly. You really want to just expect to make a mess. And you can sort of mitigate the mess by, doing it in a plastic bin in the sink rather than just doing it on the counter. If it's a nice day, you can go outside on a picnic table and work outside so you don't have so much to clean up. But not worrying about the fact that the kids are going to get their hands dirty and get everything on their clothes and get it in their hair is what really makes it a cake for breakfast activity. Auntie Donia, it's time for cake.
So today's special cake treat is from Squish Marshmallows in the Lower East Side in New York. And these are homemade marshmallow cakes covered in chocolate. And the one that I chose for us today is a pumpkin spice one because I thought it would be seasonal with the weather turning so cold. So, you ready to try it?
Ready.
Okay. Oh, yum. Wow.
The Let's Talk About Super Special Kids and Cake podcast would like to thank our host, Sacred Heart University's School of Communication and Media Studies. We'd also like to thank our composer, Marty Eisenberg, our editor, Brent, and our audio engineer and director of cake-based operations, Matt Henshaw.